I want to tell you a story, and I'm not a professional speaker, so indulge me on that. If I miss things, just call me out on it. It's a cautionary tale. We call it a cautionary tale of destination marketing. It's a story about one organization's shift from Inc. as in incorporated to incubator, and it's about digital disruption and leveraging digital disruption, something that I'm counting on everybody in this room, you young smart people, to know more about than I know about. But it's about the fact that, a really important point here, the variable cost of marketing in a disrupted world is rapidly approaching zero. That's a really important point. We're going to come back to it. It's about the fact that there is a impending and very necessary shift from destination marketing to destination marketing and management. And it's the fact that if you can empower your avids to become the distributors of your communication message, you not only have a greater ROI on your communication budget, but you also have a higher level of credibility. I'd like to tell you that I wrote that story, but I didn't. A team of young professionals just like yourself come to work every day at RTO4, and they work like mad, and they defend their ideas, and they push them up to me, and they say, this is a good idea, here's how it's going to work, make room for it, make operating room for it, and that's my job. As a CEO, I get to make the operating room for those ideas to flourish or fail, and frankly, failure is okay if it teaches us something. So, a little bit of context. Post-Second World War, Canada was a destination of choice for the world. It saw a disproportionate share of tourism influx. That has tapered off in the last 15, 20 years. While we still score theoretically number one when you do destination preference in World Survey, we often score as low as, I heard last week, 17 in terms of actual conversion. All right, so that said, the Ontario government in 2010 adopted a regional tourism model, and it came out of a study called the Destination Ontario Report, or the Sabera Report. The Sabera Report, I'm just all over the place here. The Sabera Report really identified the fact that we had slipped in international rankings in terms of performance, and saw that the need for a coordinated investment across public and private sector, and the need specifically outlined for 13 tourism regions as an incubator and a start to that process. So you can imagine that when we set up those regions, for $40 million influx, there was a mad rush in the very early phase to branding. Branding is what we do in tourism. We live it, we breathe it, we love it, we compete on it. You got to remember, though, that really, specifically, we have very different sort of destinations. We have 13 regions, 3 of them are natural tourism destinations. When I say Canada, Niagara Falls, you know what it is. When I say Toronto, Ottawa, you know what it is. The other 10 regions were made up of various, what we call second-tier cities, so populations of 150, 300,000. Some had natural demand generators, some had world-class theaters like our Stratford Festival, some had famous waterways and canals, but for the most part, they were second-tier destinations made up of cities and smaller towns, maybe heritage towns, etc. But there still was that real push towards branding. So I would say the first 2 years were very, very brand focused. And I want to make a point here. All 13 models that were developed are different. They're all idiosyncratically different. They all speak to different destinations in different regions. They're all valid. Ours is a little bit different, and I'm going to talk about RTO4 specifically here. So when you can imagine a $40 million influx into the tourism marketing community in the first year, you can imagine there was a mass uptake. Everybody had a new AOR. Agencies loved us, brand new AORs, lots of accounts. Radio, newspaper, digital, outdoor just flew off the shelf, and it was absolute feeding frenzy. As I say, we actually at RTO4 chose not to brand. And we chose not to brand specifically based on the lessons that we'd learned in a sort of retrospective historical look at what had happened. There had been regional tourism offices in Ontario twice in the last 30 years. And in each case, we saw that at some point, the regional tourism brand, specifically in our region, we had 2 different names, began to eclipse the brands of our destinations or our attractions inside that region. And that made for friction. And pretty soon, we had a regional office that was, in some sense, in competition with our existing strong brands. Many of the brands in our region were not exactly stellar or performing well, but you have to remember, some of them were 100 years old. Our heritage towns had brand names that people recognized that had literally been going in the province for 100, 150 years. So they occupied a specific geographic créneau in the traveler's mind, and it really made a lot more sense to leverage those brands, transform those brands, fix those brands, than it did to start with net new umbrella brands. Or to put it a little bit differently, when the board asked the new team if we were going to do branding as part of our experiment, we have a budget of a little less than $2 million. We said, not likely with that kind of money. I mean, there's a cat food manufacturer just down the highway from our offices that spends more on their cat food line in a year than we could possibly spend on our regional tourism brand. It just didn't make sense. So RTO4 is an interesting name, and it was very much intended to be a harbinger of the fact that we saw ourselves as a B2B business and not a B2C business, and that we were not there to replace our stakeholder brands. When people asked us, why RTO4? Why? And we just said, we couldn't think of a worse name. They really couldn't. It did open doors for us. It positioned us as there to help, and it headed off the complexity and the conflict that comes with umbrella branding. And I think many of you have been through this in regions. I know that there's Newfoundland is here today. Where are you guys? You're rolling into regional tourism models, and there's a big question. When you start to rebrand existing regions and things, you necessarily create conflict. The big issue there is $2 million sounds like a lot of money, but when you start looking at it from a brand creation perspective, it's not. And so you've got to mitigate that conflict from the start. So with our brand in place, with our non-brand in place, our moniker RTO4, we set out to develop a strategy for growing the tourism economy using the same tool that you would in any developmental business, whether it's television, whether it's car manufacturing. I'm a firm believer that you start with a goal, strategy, measurement model. If you don't have something to shoot for and you don't have a way to measure it, then you're never going to actually have a strategy to execute it. And we were rigorously committed to this. The goal, strategy, measurement directive has informed our core business and all the operating adjustments. And you guys know Jack Welch from GE, fix it, close it, or sell it. For the last 4 years, it's informed our fix it, close it, or sell it. So goal one we set was to grow overnights. And overnights, visitor spends 400% of a day trip visitor, that kind of thinking went into it. And you got to remember, we're not in a vacuum. We've also got to implement all this in a culture of DMOs. We have 7 existing DMOs. So by choosing an overnight focus, we sort of were treading lightly around them and building consensus. If we'd come in and told them we were going to do marketing with them, there would have been a bit of a wall. But we said, look, we're going to zero in on overnights. You're heavily skewed towards day trip destinations. Just RTO4 sits just west of Toronto, so you can imagine with a 3 million plus market there, we look at it as a very, very important feeder market. Problem is, it's an hour and a half away, so you can come and you can go home. So DMOs were good with us zeroing in on overnights. And with a $1.7 million budget in what we call the Petri dish, we called the region the Petri dish, we had to find ways to measure small initiatives in parts of the dish and then create models to amplify those things that showed a successful ROI. Put it another way, small or medium projects that recombined existing resources in a way with minimal cash input that achieved high ROI that made operators and DMOs alike saying, hey, we want to do more of that. So we put in place a regional reservation system, and it was a big job, and this is going back 2011, and these things were still quite vogue. In fact, if you had one, you were probably leading edge. And we figured it was going to solve a whole bunch of problems. It was a simple and direct path to purchase. It was agnostic. We made it so that you could put it on your DMO website, or you could actually have a version on your operator site, and it solved a problem that was really prevalent in 11, and that was many of our operators didn't have a digital path to purchase. You weren't able to buy their goods and services online. So we signed up 300 operators across the region. As I say, DMOs ran it as their res system. They branded it and put it on their site. We ran it from a central repository for people who just wanted to feed into it. Operators branded it and put it on their site. They had widgets and things like that. And it did a good job. I mean, frankly, in the first 3 years, it did $6 million in throughput in sales, and that's pretty good. It was a greater return than our funding from the government, so that was a good start. And it gave us, more importantly, it gave us a really good window on our best ROI return activities. And we expected a category killer. We got a single point of purchase. It was well executed. It was a distributed system. It was free to DMOs and attractions, and it was well marketed and well supported from a technical perspective. But while sales were good, its real power surfaced in telling us what didn't work. So while we don't have an overall consumer brand in RTO4, we did expend resources marketing our strong existing brands. And remember, again, we're not in a vacuum. We had to be sensitive DMOs. So we sat down and we had to hammer out some demand generator themes that we could work on together that they agreed on. And you got to remember, they serve often so many masters. Most our DMO partners had 100 plus members or so. And they get really off into the minutia of serving that ski hill and those restaurants and that park. And so the idea of zeroing in on 4 major themes was a tough go, but we got through it, and really we come up with 4 things. So in our region, which basically, I don't know if you guys know Ontario, it's about the size of Texas and Montana, just up above New York and Ohio and Pennsylvania there. In our region, we run from pretty much Toronto to the edge of Lake Huron, and then about 100 kilometers wide, north and south from that. We have 4 major demand generator themes. Theater. We have most of you probably have heard of the Stratford Shakespeare Festival. It's one of the world's preeminent Shakespeare festivals outside of Britain. It's a fabulous piece of theater, and it's supported by 2 really strong supporting casts. Drayton Festival, which is a series of 7 theaters, and the Blythe Festival, which is the preeminent Canadian playhouse. So we knew we had a strong demand generator position in Ontario in theaters. When I say demand generator, I mean, the classic definition, something people will drive 4 hours to do, and et cetera. But what I also mean is stuff that would cut through the marketing clutter in Ontario so that people would see it and go, I'll go there to do that. Not advertising with parody, not saying we've got theme parks and we've got whatever, the things that generally occur every 90 kilometers or so. No, zeroing in on what we did well. We had 4 heritage towns. We commissioned a study on heritage towns and gardens, and came up with the fact that in Ontario, there's a handful of heritage towns, but probably 10 or 11, but we have 4 very succinct heritage towns that are architecturally significant, historically significant, and they're dispersed throughout the regions. And they run from very little towns with 11,000 people up to bigger towns with 80,000 people, but they are significant heritage towns. We have a sport tourism propensities. We've got 4 cities clustered right on the main highway in Ontario, the 401 highway, just west of Toronto, about an hour and a half. Those 4 cities together have a combined population of over 500,000 people, which when we commissioned a study on meetings and conventions, we came up with a really interesting observation. We didn't have a position in meetings and conventions. There was a glut of space and resource all around us. But what we did we had more teams, more sport members, more facilities, more volunteers than just about any other cluster in Ontario. So we took a position in sport tourism. And we also, in sport, have a world-class Canadian motocross finals, which is up in the northwest end of our region. And then we have, and this one was really an agreement, and this shows our flexibility with our DMOs, and I'm going to talk about the need to build consensus in a bit. We agreed on culinary. We are not truly a culinary destination. Every destination in the world wants to be a culinary destination because we all eat and we talk about it, and we all shop and we talk about it. But we agreed that we had one strong city that was doing some great work in culinary, and we wanted to grow that. So those became our 4 key demand generators, and they were accepted by our DMOs, and we went to work. So with a measurement system in place, come back. All right, with a measurement system in place, relative agreement on our demand generators, we jumped into traditional marketing, and man, were we clever. We were just so clever. We ran an integrated newspaper, television, billboard ad on a project called Closer Than You Think, leveraging our proximity to Toronto. We had a bright new shiny AOR, and they were ready to go, and we'd go and have cappuccinos with them all the time. We had a 6-figure budget, and we had absolutely award-winning content, and I'll get to that. And we sat back and we thought, this is going to rock, and we waited for the cash to roll in. And it kind of did. It sort of did. We made back our money. We did that $6 million. But this was a closed system. And because it was a closed system, we could track every single initiative. And the thing we had set out to measure, goal, strategy, or measurement, remember that imperative, was overnights. And the truth of the matter was, our click-through rates were good, our time on page, our GRPs were great, but it just really wasn't impressive when it came to achieving the goal of overnights. So, and that's where RTL4 as a tourism development incubator really takes off. We've taken the best conventional practices, top demand generators, easy path to purchase, solid, well-educated marketing, well-targeted and award-winning content. And I mean award-winning. So at the end of one of our runs on campaign, one of the premier publications, I won't name them, came up to us and said, hey, we want to nominate you for the Marketing Creative Award of the Year. And we said, yeah, you know, it didn't actually work. And they said, no, look at your GRPs, look at your click-through rates, time on page. And we said, yeah, but it didn't really work. And they said, come on, we want, and in the end we said no, because it just, frankly, it didn't actually work. So we had at it, and that's, we had to go back to the drawing board, and I want to introduce this guy. Where is he? Zach Gribble. Stand up, Zach. It's not the Unabomber, but it looks like him. So, and Zach's our director of media technology. Zach's doing a breakout session on Social Meets Digital. It's a deep dive on the impact and use of dashboards. I wouldn't miss it. Like, if you want to talk about leveraging digital disruption, this is our secret weapon here. So Zach, in one of our projects, set up an A/B test with one of our major theater festivals. So we were marketing into the US. We had a six-figure, and I mean high mid-six-figure, budget to do some real development work in a US city that's west of us with one of our theater festivals. And Zach said, well, let me do an A/B test here. Let me fix the UX on their site. It's a broken UX. There's a bunch of dead path to purchase issues. There's some real dead ends. I said, what are you going to spend? He said, 30, tops, 30K. So we were in to the six figures on the media side. We spent 30 on the UX side, the hygiene side. And here's what's interesting. The campaign was nominal at best. I'm being gracious here. It was nominal in terms of return on investment. The $30,000 spent on the UX side of their site, and remember, we're tracking overnights, so we're using a theater site to track whether or not it drives overnights, doubled their overnights in the space of a year. That's taking them from $750,000 to $1.5 million on a $30,000 fix. Outstanding. Like, I mean, you want to talk about ROI. And that's really the tipping point for RTO4. We get very aggressive about challenging our conventional destination marketing assumptions, and we begin a firm commitment to what a couple years later is a full B2B commitment to being a tourism incubator. And we shift our yearly budget for marketing communications to what we call enabling engagement. Enabling engagement, in our opinion, is the single most important thing a destination can do in A, dealing with digital disruption, and B, future-proofing a destination for the emerging and radically different buyer decision process that now takes place in tourism. So, over the past 4 years, we've developed an incubator model around 5 guiding principles. And those principles are enabling engagement, hygiene first, destinations, not DMOs, redefining brand, and a relentless focus on visitor experience. So, enabling engagement. It's about working with operators, DMOs, stakeholders, local governments, and helping them see where they already have traction and working in partnership with them to A, help them identify stories that resonate with visitors, B, help them become more capable of amplifying and sharing those stories, and C, this inevitably starts a self-propelling cycle where they become better curators and creators. So let me give you an example, another A/B test, and we use them all the time now. We use them to identify more of this and less than that, and you can bet that the less of that is less untrackable activity with big media and soft metrics. So this one's about marketing our fine inns product. We have a smattering of fine, high-end inns in our region, and we did an A/B test where we did conventional digital marketing for a cluster of inns and pushed them out to Facebook to people who had likes for inns, etc. And we needed a B, and so the B was we talked to one of our inns, and a very progressive young guy who owns it, and we were really having trouble saying, what's the B? What's the social side of the inn thing? So I was driving home one night, and I stopped in to see Nick at his inn, and I said, Nick, if you had $5,000 to spend on marketing next year for an inn or an establishment, that's a pretty good lift, what would you spend it on? And his first cut was, wow, I'd buy the Center of the Food and Drink magazine, I'd do a big spread, and I said, oh, does that work really well for you? And he goes, well, I don't know, I've never done it before. I said, okay, so let me ask the question differently. If you only had $3,000 next year to do marketing for the inn, what's the first thing every single year without hesitation that you would do without even thinking about it? And sure enough, the operator knows their business. They can answer like that. He said, oh, garden parties. I said, pardon? It's garden parties. Every year we run a spring garden party. We invite about 90 guests. We give them some Prosecco, some hors d'oeuvres. We tour them around. He goes, I book $9,000 weddings every year. I say, okay. So we go back to the team, go back to the Zacks of RTO4 and say, here's what Nick said about engagement. And he said, what do we do? And the team says, garden parties. And go, no, we don't have a mandate to do garden parties. Can't do that. So what should we do? And Zach came back a day later. He said, you know, I did a bit of an investigation. First thing I did is I looked on Facebook, and I looked for people who had self-identified as getting engaged in the last 12 months who live within 50, 100, and 150 kilometer radius of Nick's property, who self-identified as wanting a small wedding, 80 people or less, we knew his capacity, and wanted a price point between X and Y. And he said, and you know what, I found 900 of them. So we took some content that Zach curated from Nick's site, which was some wedding stuff, someone gets up on the table, falls down kind of stuff. It was quite a good little viral video. Promoted it, and I asked Zach, what do you need as a budget on this? And he goes, $200. $200. I've got a director of marketing who asked for $200,000 every time. So it was kind of an easy go. And we put it up there, and on a $200 spend, Nick sells 2 more $9,000 weddings. So talk about, again, a return on investment. All of these case studies are online at rto4.ca. I've got some other ones to blast through with you, but I'm going to a little short on time. Drayton Theaters is on there. They were a deep dive into dashboards. Dashboards changed the way they looked at their business, and that really affected how they amplified stories, what stories they chose. The Cambridge Butterfly Conservatory, absolute gem of a little product. No idea how to get onto the on-ramp for social media. Working with them directly on helping them identify stories and amplify those stories, game changer for them. Stratford Perth Museum, taking them from a non-storytelling perspective to a storytelling perspective, game changer again. As I say, all 3 studies are on our website. They're there so we can share them with our operators, so we can share them with our other RTOs, so we can share them with the Ministry of Tourism, Culture, and Sport, who helps us fund this whole thing, so that we can make this a better region. So, principle number 2 is hygiene first. Here's this Zach loves this slide. All right. And it's an outgrowth of the AB theater test, really. We're obsessed in marketing, and not just tourism marketing, car marketing, in music marketing, in destination marketing. We're obsessed with marketing message, reach, and frequency. And there's a real dangerous propensity to ignore the fact that so many of our core communications pieces are fundamentally broken. And you go back to that idea of the theater website where the UX was bad. People couldn't buy. And people were just, when you start to measure them flocking off the page, they were just disappearing, falling over the ramp when it came to purchase. They wanted to purchase, they couldn't purchase. If you think about it, DMO sites, for the most part, like many websites in the last 15 years, were developed in an iterative process. And it's very rare that we tear them right back down to ground zero and start building again. So generally there's cobwebs and there's dead-end hallways and stuff. Fixing those UX things that make websites frustrating and confusing is probably the highest single return on investment that we've found at the RTO. Working with our DMO partners to do that, working with operators to do that. Broken path to purchase, dead ends are just absolute conversion killers. And just, they're bad hygiene. We have a marketing model at RTO4 we call the Hygiene Motivator model, and it was developed over years and years with myself and a partner, and it really goes like this. You don't get to do the motivator side of marketing until you do the hygiene side. You do the hygiene side first. It's a little bit like having a car, not putting any tires on it and trying to go to Cleveland. Doesn't work. Put the tires on it, go to Cleveland. So the next principle was destinations, not DMOs. we work with operators, we work with DMOs to make them, as the old saying goes, better fishers of people, not giving them filet of fish sandwiches, but making them more capable themselves of fishing. So our key findings with DMOs was that they weren't, while they were charged with piloting tourism strategy and growing their respective tourism economies, they weren't well aligned to do it. They had no mayors, no BIAs, no ECDev. They might have some, sort of facile connection with those groups, but they had no formalized process to integrate all of those resources back to the destination. If you think about it, the destination is all of those resources. The DMO is one constituent, the mayor is one constituent. When we started talking about destinations, things changed. And really, forget about future-proofing and welcome to an arena if you don't build consensus where all you can do is continue to do the same thing. You can advertise, you can be your little DMO stuck here with no connection. So when we shifted from DMO to destination, things start to happen. There we go. So using destination as a lens made a big difference, and we looked at community engagement, and specifically we started to say, how do we get tourism on the political agenda of all our mayors and all our councilors, and how do we get them sitting at the same table as the DMO, and how do we get the operators at that table, and how do we do it in a structured way? And that's the important part here, because you can get them all in a meeting. We've all done that. We've had town halls. How do you build a structure around it? So over the past year, we've set up 4 independent projects, and they're with the 4 heritage towns that we identified. 2 of the projects are being run under DMAI's Destination Next program. Most of you are probably familiar. We are the first in situ application of Destination Next in the world in 2 of our cities. One of our projects in our theater town is with Destination Think, and the third one is with a group called Tourism Cafe out of Canada, who are experiential development consultants. In each case, though, the mayor was the first point of contact, and we made a deal that this was a 3-year process. You sat down with us, we'd fund the beginning of this, we'd sit down, but you had to bring in the BIA, the counselors, and you want to see BIA counselors and chamber and people show up, have the mayor invite them. They show up. And all of a sudden, the DMO went from being an administrative part of a model up to here, sitting on par, talking about what can we do with these destinations. These groups sit down now every 30 to 45 days as a group, and the mayor sits at that table, the BIA sits at that table every 30 to 45 days, and they're co-developing a tourism development strategy for their destination. And this is a huge shift. The entire destination sees itself as an active partner in tourism. It's what Destination Next is trying to do. It's what Destination Think is helping us to do. It's what Tourism Cafe wants us to do. The entire destination becomes an active partner in tourism. In each, I'm going to do a little bit of fun here. As I said, at the beginning we made 3-year deals with all the offices of the mayors and everybody to join us, and we have a core planning group. We call the planning group the Viking Boat. And the Viking Boat is 16 or 18 fairly like-minded people who are all ready to row in the same direction. We've all been in the tourism meeting where you've got 3 or 4 or 5 dissenters. The Viking Boat has got a path, and it's got to go from here to England, and if someone starts rowing the other way, well, you know what Vikings do when you start rowing the other way, right? So everyone's there crafting a mutual destination goal, and I got to tell you, articulating the opportunity as destination, not DMO, was essential to that. It took a great deal of courage for our DMOs to step into that arena, but when they did, it was an absolute shift in the game. So we have a maxim about destinations. I'll let you read that. I won't read it to you. It's a pithy statement, a general truth of rule or conduct. That's the definition of a maxim. Highly engaged, active role, collectively shaping, engagement across a broad number of players. It informs everything we do with destinations. So the 4th guiding principle is redefining brand. And it may seem really academic, but it's really important. RTO 4 defines brand as the sum total of shared stories and experiences about a given destination or attraction. In a pre-disruption world, brand was usually a distinguishing mark or symbol, or more broadly, a promise of a quality of good or service. When you redefine brand as shared stories, again, in a pre-digital world, that would just mean that the cost of distribution was still yours. But in a post-disruptive world, it's not a significant marketing expense, and here's why. So Salim Ismail, I don't know if you guys have read his book. Salim is the founder of Singularity University. He's a futurist, and he makes just the most prescient statement in his book, and if you haven't read this book, I swear, you got to go out and read it right away. The variable cost of marketing is rapidly approaching zero. The variable cost of marketing is rapidly approaching zero. It's about nurturing your avids. It's about curating what they do. It's about letting them take care of your distribution. Look at Uber or Amazon or Airbnb. We call it AvidCom. That's what we do. So at RTO4, we've got this focus now on AvidCom. How do we make our avids our communicators? It may not have the reach and frequency of big media, but it frees up budget to do three key things: fix, share, and manage. Fix hygiene issues, up your sharing quotient, and allow you to shift your resources to managing the visitor experience. Which brings us to our final guiding principle, a relentless focus on visitor experience. In some sense, we're stuck in a sort of post-1940s production model of marketing. You sell what you got. You know, Henry Ford was the best at this. You can have a Ford in any color you like, as long as it's black. Almost the entire 20th century, from a management science perspective, was focused on optimization, and that led to a production-based marketing model. There's a brief stint at the end of the 90s where, right between production-based models and job enrichment, comes this section where marketing was a core discipline of a company, you know, a focus on goods and services that don't come back for people to do. But along comes digital, and I mean pre-internet digital, and all of a sudden we went back to sharp pencil combinatorics and optimization because computers allowed us to be even more precise in scientific management. Marketing really ends up so often, and we argue about this all the time in tourism, becoming synonymous with advertising, and it's not. It's a relentless process of development, and we need to go back to that idea of developing experiences. So, and don't get me wrong, on the measurement side, on the combinatorics optimization, it informs everything we do. It's the reason in some sense we've been successful at the RTO, because we're utterly focused on measuring what does and doesn't work. We're just really happy when we find stuff that doesn't work, because it lets us shift. And what it's done consistently is let us shift great big tranches of money that weren't working to much more distributed, smaller projects that do work. So the measurement side is sufficient in helping us shift the resources, but it doesn't help us be better tourism products, more immersive, more authentic, more satisfying, more valued, and more shared. And it really doesn't speak to the need to structure our organizations to engage, nurture, enhance all the products that make us different. That's a mindset shift that you have to take back as young people, as smart people, and you have to infect your organizations with that. But you can do it. As I said, Zach and his team fight every day for their ideas. And they come at it now with a goal strategy measurement model. They didn't always do that. 3 years ago, they didn't do that. They tell me what they're shooting for, and they tell me what their pain points are and where they're going to identify their failures over the way. And I look at it and try and, as I say, with the ministry, make operating room for that. So let me finish with a visitor experience story. And I got to tell you this story because I was trying to figure out in the past couple of weeks, how do you sort of identify avids? And it's a big part of what we're doing with Destination Things. How do you find those people who are the avids? And when you're not in the target market, they always say of marketers, it's really hard to be in the target market, right? You're there, you're analyzing. So here's what I come up with. If you want to be an avid, find the thing that you just love to do, like that is completely different. I'll go traveling with my wife, we'll go to Europe, we'll go to museums, and it's kind of cool, but I'm not avid. It's mountain biking. I'm avid mountain biker. So my young brother, who's a better mountain biker than I and much fitter, we drove to the northeastern U.S., let's call it the northeastern U.S., about 3 weeks ago on a mountain bike adventure to ride these fabulous trails. And we had just a fabulous time, and I realized I was immersed. I was a traveler again, you know, and I went looking for places to stay. I pulled into a little town, and I couldn't find anywhere to stay, and I went on TripAdvisor, and I found a place to stay, and I ended up there. And the next morning, I talked to the inn owner, and she was lovely, and she said, "Oh, you found me on TripAdvisor?" And I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "Well, I pay for that." And I go, "Oh, yeah, I didn't actually find you on the bit you pay for." She goes, "What do you mean, I pay for that?" And I go, "Well, there's a couple different ways this works." And it was amazing because she's our operator, and she doesn't understand both sides of that equation. And she doesn't understand that actually when we went back in her office and looked at a bunch of stuff, I said, most of these people appear to be coming from the referral side, not the paid side. That's not to say don't do paid, but be aware of it. That's the world we live in. Fast forward a couple days, we had a great ride. We're driving back through a different town, a very famous little ski town, and we pull into town, and there's a car show on, and the place is busy and hopping. It's kind of cool. We get coffee, my brother and I. We go in the local DMO office, it's a really nice office, and we said, hey, we're mountain bikers. We'd like to find somewhere to stay. We heard there's great riding here. What do you got? And the fellow says, there's one room left in town. It's $350 a night. He said, pardon? And he says, there's one room left. And he said, we have a res system. And I said, that's okay. Well, we'll deal with that later. What about mountain biking? The guy goes, well, there's a lift here. It's $35. You go up, come down. And there's another one over here. You can go to this one. It's great. He said, that's downhill. We don't really do downhill. We're kind of enduro riders. It's up and down. And he goes, I don't know what that is. I said, fair enough. He said, well, those are the two trails, and that's the hotel situation. So, and I kind of go outside and think, well, this is kind of weird. So my brother says, I got to go to the washroom. Good. So I sit down, I pull out my phone, and I start going on TripAdvisor. I find 12 hotels right away that have vacancy. 12 hotels. And I throw him the first one, and the guy says, what are you here for? And I tell him, he says, we got a room. It's like $280. I said, look, we got to get up at 8. We got to be back in Ontario after lunch. He says, you know what? If you're not staying for breakfast, I got a room with a bed and pull-out couch. I'll give it to you for $150. Boom, done. So we're driving to the hotel, and it's a bike shop. We pull in the bike shop and say, hey, we're here. We thought there were a whole bunch of good trails, but apparently, and the guy goes, oh, God, no, there's fabulous trails. He says, where are you staying? So we tell him. He says, oh, my God, right across the street is the best free single track in the state. And you go, really? We rode it the next morning. It was the best free single track in the state. And I'm not trying to cast aspersions on our DMO models, because we all get stuck in that world of membership. It was a membership-based DMO. It had its partners. It had those struggles that we all struggle with in terms of funding and marketing. But I got to tell you, if we listened to them, we would have left. And by the time we were done with the room, with a big blowout dinner because we were so excited we were staying, and gas and snacks and whatever the next one, we probably dropped $500. But we would have gotten our car and drove on. And then we gotta learn to change that. That's not looking at things through the lens of the visitor experience. That's looking at the lens in a production-based model. We make it, you buy it. So that leaves me to a bunch of people. Where are they? These people. So I'm going to show you my team. But first I want to thank some people. I want to thank the Ontario Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport for having the courage to step up and address a really difficult issue. How to grow tourism in a disrupted world, how to bring back Ontario to the level of competitiveness it used to have. Their investment's significant. The Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport, Michael Coteau, has been a big supporter of this. He's a strategic thinker, and he's made all of this possible, makes my life possible so that I can make the operating room for guys like Zach and Emily and Napier possible. I want to thank our tourism advisor who works with the ministry. His name is Paul Sampson. I don't get a chance to thank him publicly. It means nothing to you, but it means lots to me to thank him. And I want to thank these people. I'm going to tell you my team. Napier Simpson is our CMO, COO, one of the brightest guys I know. He is the check and balance in our system. He's the guy who, like me, comes from a very traditional model of business management, and he has relentlessly forced us to go back to goal, strategy, measurement, and constantly justify what we're doing. Sherry Dwaron is our newest hire. She's our Director of Sport Tourism. We stole her away from New Brunswick. She's fabulous, and she's bringing a level of sophistication and coordination to those 4 cities that have a competitive sport product together that wasn't there before. Zach Gribble, one of the brightest young men I know. Working with Zach, we hired him as a consultant. He lasted about a month in that job, and then we took him on full-time and gave him a 6-figure salary. Really has been an instrument of change, and a guy I'm proud to mentor personally. When you get old, you get young people you get to mentor. I get to mentor Zach, and it's very fruitful. Karen Mitchell, who used to be Karen Sampe till a month ago. Karen Mitchell, who is probably the nicest person in tourism and works harder than anyone I've ever met. Emily Chandler, who has a connector ability and interpersonal skill like nobody I know, and she can go out and get people to join, get people on board. She's a conscientious project development person. And Andrea Gardy, who we got from the University of Waterloo, who did her master's in tourism development, who's one of the best young strategic thinkers I've ever met. Why do I tell you this? Why do I tell you all these people? Why do I tell you we pay them well? I tell you so that you will try to poach them. I tell you so you will try to poach them so that I will work incredibly hard not to let you do that. I will go home and I will work hard to make sure that they have the operating room they need to do projects that they don't get to do anywhere else. I will make sure their jobs are more fulfilling, and I'll make sure that they get to reach further. So I tell you that because it makes me work harder. But they're a great team. They wrote this story. They're responsible for the success we've had. They pushed us down that new path. They need a little bit of mentoring from some senior management like us, but for the most part, as I say, they show up every day now and they defend their ideas and they reach and they justify and they're not afraid to fail. They post their failures and they check them off and say, okay, that didn't work, don't do that again. You get to do the wrong thing twice in our office. You don't get to do it 3 times. So anyway, on that note, that is the end.